Steven Andress here for thelines.com. In this video, we are going to look at college football odds and futures for the first time this season as the first Saturday in the fall is approaching for the 2022 campaign. Joining me is the Lines college football writer, Brett Gibbons. You can find him on Twitter at @RoadToCFB. We're going to look at futures odds here, including national championship, conference title odds, odds to make the playoffs, and also Heisman odds as well. Brett's found a little bit of interesting information on some long shots if you look at preseason Heisman odds over recent years. So first of all, Brett, thank you for joining us. You have been to how many college football stadiums in person in your life?
104. I've been to 31 different games. That's going to go up a lot this year, but I've been to 104 different college football stadiums, 104 college towns all over the country from sea to shining sea.
Absolutely love it. So he is a diehard, people. He is dug deep into the betting markets for college football going into this season. And let's begin with conference futures odds. And if you are new to the site, if you go to thelines.com under the odds tab, you can find NCAA football. You can find weekly college football lines throughout the season, but you can also find national title odds. Inside that national title odds page, you can sort by conference as well. So we'll get to these futures in a minute, but I want to start with the Big 12, Brett. And there has been a lot of hype, a lot of steam around Texas yet again, as there seems to be every year. But they are still the second choice behind Oklahoma. Oklahoma, best available price, plus 200. Texas at 3-1. Oklahoma State at 5.5-1. And then we get to Baylor at 6.5-1. And everybody else is double digits to win this conference. There have been a lot of people who have been hyping Texas, think the ceiling is high on this team. But tell me why you landed on Oklahoma still.
I really want to back Texas this year. I do. I like their weapons. It really sucks to see Wyoming transfer Isaiah Nayor go down. He was averaging about 22 yards a catch last year. Unbelievable. Takes the top off of defense. He's out for the season with a knee injury. But I was still off of Texas before then. It's just, do you want to buy 3-1 into, a ceiling play? If I'm looking at ceiling plays, I'm looking a lot longer than 3-1. We'll talk about Oklahoma State. I think that's a ceiling play. We'll talk about some other teams later on that are also ceiling plays, but I just can't get on board at plus 300 for a ceiling play like that. But they are extremely talented. People are going berserk over their FPI rating, their SP Plus rating. They're properly power rated. They have a ton of weapons. That defense, oh boy, it needs to fix, and I do have questions about their offensive line. I think we're going to see some multiple true freshmen playing on this offensive line, but I don't know. I don't want to buy them at 3-1. If they're longer, maybe a mid-season, if they drop a couple of games, maybe, but I just don't like their price. It's nothing against the team.
So what is it about Oklahoma that you still find attractive despite the lack of continuity in the coaching staff going into this season?
Yeah, so I don't ever want to give benefit of the doubt, but I fall into that trap a lot. I did it last year at Clemson. You always give them the benefit of the doubt. It's Dabo, it's Clemson. This is Oklahoma, and I know that they have a new head coach, but Brent Venables has experience in Oklahoma. He was a defensive coordinator for several years, about over a decade ago, and they're still near the top of the odds boards for a reason. They're one of 6 teams that are going to be favored and projected to be favored, I should say, in every single game this year. That's a pretty big deal. And I really buy into Dylan Gabriel. I think he's escaped our minds because he had a broken collarbone last year. He didn't play at all, but he threw for over 8,000 yards and 70 touchdowns in a little over 2 seasons at UCF. 2 seasons, and he's doing 8,000 yards, 70 touchdowns. They are 10th overall in the nation in incoming roster score. They hit the transfer portal pretty hard, even for what they lost. They recruit really well. And, I want to talk about their schemes really quick. That's coming in Norman. People are like, well, is Brent Venables' defensive scheme going to be too complex for them? No, I don't think so. That defensive line was already pretty good at using complex stunts. They were already moving all over the place. And, that's what Brent Venables brings to the table, and that's what he excels at. So I do have worries outside of that defensive line on defense, but we've seen Oklahoma in the past be, pretty good with a subpar defense. I think they're just going to pick right back up where they left off.
So you like to build some conference titles at times, depending on the prices. How I like to bet golf outrights and building a couple of different options with the hope that one of them hits and you still have a pretty solid projected profit if one of those teams crosses the finish line first. So let's stay inside the state here with Oklahoma State. You got them at 7-1. They're down to plus 550. So you are not alone here. It seems that if you're going to take a little bit more of a long shot outside the top two in Oklahoma and Texas, maybe the Cowboys are the way to go. Why?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite stats in all of college football. Over the past 14 seasons, Oklahoma State's won at least 8 games 12 times. They've never gone under 500 in that time. They're just consistently good. No matter what goes in, goes out. We've seen the Oklahoma State, that wins 63-56. We've also seen the Oklahoma State from this past year that had a top 10 defense nationally. So I think they're probably the most dependable team in terms of roster experience. People are going to point to, they lost Malcolm Rodriguez and some All-Americans on the defense, but they rotated a ton of guys in, just like Georgia. That's why people aren't too worried about Georgia's defense regressing this year. I don't think they're going to take a huge step back, especially with Derek Mason, who comes in. They lost Jim Knowles. That's a pretty big deal to Ohio State. But Derek Mason has a ton of experience as both a successful defensive coordinator and a head coach. So I think they're going to be just fine. Phil Steele, I got his preview magazine right behind me up there. He ranks their defensive line 3rd overall in the entire country, and he ranks Oklahoma State 3rd overall in the conference behind Baylor and Oklahoma. I do have concerns about Spencer Sanders, though. He was named first team preseason all-conference. I'd probably pick Dylan Gabriel or even Adrian Martinez as unreliable as he can be, but Spencer Sanders has a very high floor, but he's also going to lose you games. If you look at the Bedlam game, Oklahoma State had that game in the bag, and he's like, no, here you go, Oklahoma. And Oklahoma's like, we don't want to win this game either. Here you go, Spencer Sanders. Gave it right back. So you look, if you translate the 7-1 that I bought them at, that's about a 12.5% win probability. I think Oklahoma State has a way better chance than that, considering their talent, their returning talent, their coaching staff, and just the fact that they're just always there.
For sure, and it hasn't gone up a ton in terms of implied probability. That plus 550 now is still 15% implied probability for Oklahoma State to win the Big 12. Let's move on now to the team that has been the talk of college football all offseason, with Lincoln Riley headed over to the Pac-12, and we pull up the odds to win the Pac-12 conference this season. And as we stand right now, it is USC at the top of the board, best available price at plus 220. Utah not too far behind at plus 250. That number has come down a bit from what we saw at 3-1 a few weeks ago. Oregon 3-1, and then the rest of the conference, essentially double-digit odds of the rest of the conference for the best available prices. So it appears here, Brett, that the market is firmly entrenched that it's going to be one of these 3 teams that wins the Pac-12 this season. Do you agree with that? And how are you parsing these two, beginning, let's start with USC.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I just don't see how a Washington, or as fun as they're going to be, Washington State, UCLA, I just don't see how any of those kind of pop into the conference conversation. But don't bet USC right now. Don't do it. They're the favorites. You're not getting good value for them. They were, when I grabbed them, they were plus 325 at Caesars earlier in the offseason. I mean, I bought it because it was a closing line value play. What if this whole thing works? I talked about the ceiling play in, Texas doesn't have a good enough price for me to make a ceiling play. I think USC is a pretty good ceiling play because we've seen Lincoln Riley, OU, make it work. We have proof of concept. We have proof of concept with their quarterback, Caleb Williams, and his connection with Mario Williams, who transferred him from Oklahoma. We have proof of concept with Biletnikoff winner Jordan Addison, who now joins this team. So it's just a ceiling play of what if this team goes off, scores 48 points a game, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibility, especially in the Pac-12. That defense, quite frankly, it sucks. It's no good. And you kind of look at the FPI, you look at the SP Plus, they bury USC down there in the 35s and 40s. And guys like Bill Connolly and those who are kind of constructing these power ratings are like, yeah, I don't know why they're down there. I hate to side with the AP poll and not the analytics on this one. but it's a ceiling play. What if this thing works? There's a very good chance it will because we have proof that it does.
Just for reference, though, for the casual college football fan, like this is an unprecedented situation, right? Like it's really hard to quantify what this is because have we ever seen a situation where there's been this level of high caliber players transfer in and be able to play right away for a college football team?
No, never. And that's the exciting thing about this season. It's going to be a really good case study for look at USC, look at Ole Miss, look at Nebraska. These are teams that have completely rebuilt their roster in the transfer portal. It's a dangerous precedent for those who aren't, pro player movement. I am. Let them transfer, let them play, circumstances change. But, it's going to be really interesting to see if this is a winning strategy because we've never seen it before. We've seen guys transfer occasionally, but never just NFL free agency. It's college football free agency at this point. So it'll be really interesting to see if this is going to be the new way where guys go out and get their teams and win, or if it's more about cohesion and coaching and things like that have kept the more traditional powers afloat for so long.
If you are not a believer that this is going to work, this grand experiment for USC is going to work in year one and lead to a conference championship, it seems from your notes here that you're more of the belief that Utah has the best chance to go back-to-back here as opposed to Oregon winning the conference.
Yeah, I mean, if you had to twist my arm and make me pick one, I'm picking Utah. I'm a big believer in returning production. They bring back Cam Rising, who's just an electric, gritty playmaker. Tavion Thomas, who's a 1,000-yard rusher, returns. Clark Phillips, who's an All-American candidate at corner, who was dusted in the Rose Bowl, but we won't worry about that. He's a very good player. They have a crazy athletic defense that they've always had. They return a lot of those guys. And I think Utah's price, it's coming down recently, but earlier in the offseason, it really grew. I got them at 3-1 at FanDuel. And that's because people are so in on the what if of USC that I just talked about that Utah got pushed to a point where it's like, well, how can you not? I mean, this is the best team in the Pac-12. They are offensively, defensively, up front, the line of scrimmage, in the back. They have people are going to say, well, look at their corners from last year. And besides Clark Phillips, yeah, it didn't work out very well. They gave up a lot of big plays, but these guys are coming back. They're more experienced. It's just, what's there not to like about Utah? I haven't heard a strong argument against them this year.
Yeah, it seems the only argument is whether or not USC has brought in enough talent that can mesh to overtake them. On paper, it's clear Utah has brought back a ton from a conference-winning team a year ago. So finally, let's move on to a non-Power 5 conference here that you have pinpointed as one of the more interesting betting markets going into this season, and it's the MAC. We got a little MACtion here going into the year. And Toledo is the favorite at plus 350. Miami, Ohio next at plus 450. Northern Illinois at 7-1. Central Michigan around 6.5-1. Kent State at 9-1. Western Michigan at 12-1. You can find a 22-1 on Eastern Michigan. And then the rest of the conference follows at 20-1 or longer. What is it about this conference that has caught your eye in terms of the futures market?
It's all over the place. Line shopping is so important. It's something that we just hammer home in everything we write, everything we do here at the Lines. But my goodness, is there no better example than in the MAC? You can get Toledo for like 6 different numbers. I don't believe that they're the favorite at DraftKings right now. I think that belongs to Central Michigan. And then you line it up against the media poll, and the media poll is also all over the place. So there's 4 teams in particular that I really like to actually put money on. But hey, put money on whoever you want to in this one. Who knows? And it's proof in the pudding that you look back over the past almost decade of MAC championships, and you got different teams winning every single year. Like you have new players in. It wasn't too long ago when I was in school that Bowling Green was representing the MAC in the MAC championship game and winning it. So I like this because there's so big an array of prices that no one knows what's going on in the MAC. Now, Toledo's probably the best team. They lost a lot of close games last year. They took Notre Dame down to the wire early in the season. But they overall just have the most talent on the roster. The FPI and SP Plus, they favor them by, oh man, it's head and shoulders above the rest of the MAC. They don't have a unit that's ranked lower than 5th in the conference by Phil Steele, and that's running back. So, give or take there. Yeah, right. And they have large and by far the best defense. So they're bringing back 68% of their production, including their quarterback. Their offense led the MAC in scoring last year, and they had the best defense. So it's hard not to say, yeah, Toledo's the best one. But, you said they were 350 right now.
350 best available
plus
price right now, yeah.
Yeah, all right. You're betting on the who power ratings say is large and by far the best team in the MAC at plus 350. Yeah, do that. That's fine. I got them at 4-1. That's neither here nor there.
So, but in your opinion, I mean, yes, great price, right? Like you laid out the reasons why you're a little surprised that they are plus 350 and not a shorter number. But if you do want to play the field here and have a couple of different tickets in this conference, that plus 350 price opens up the opportunity to do that if you think one of these other teams can come up and upset Toledo in this market. So let's start with Central Michigan, which you bet at 6-1 at FanDuel, and there's a couple Unibet you can get them at plus 650 right now. There are a couple other 6-1 still out there. Bet Rivers at 6.5-1. So why them as a candidate that can get past the favorite here?
They're the most explosive team in the conference, and I don't think it's particularly close. Their running back, Lou Nichols, led the entire country with over 1,800 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns. He comes back alongside quarterback Daniel Richardson, who I really like, and the growing college football Twitter media space is really kind of growing on Daniel Richardson. He led the MAC in passing touchdowns last year. They lose their top wide receiver, but, you can find receivers in camp, and they have a million other productive guys coming back. But it wasn't just their offense. They would take the top off of defenses, but they were also the best in the conference and 9th overall in the country at stopping opponents on 3rd down. That sounds like a pretty good sticky stat to me. That's good coaching. That's having dudes on defense. I've seen their win total as high as 7.5, which in the MAC is perfectly good enough to be able to make a conference championship. Yeah. I mean, you're seeing most teams 7-6 get you in the conference championship, because you have teams like Kent State this season who load up with Washington, Oklahoma, and Georgia out of conference. So win totals aren't very high, but I mean, Central Michigan, good enough defense, extremely explosive on offense, and they have the best player in the conference. So I like it. The media did vote them 3rd in the West, which is interesting to me for a team that could potentially win the whole conference, but that doesn't make me waver a little bit, not terribly much, like I'm totally off them. I love their price. I just do.
Perhaps that's why the price is still where it's at. I mean, maybe this media poll is and not a lot of handle in this market is dictating that price stays where it's at. So clearly you are a big believer in their offense for sure. Even further down the board, Northern Illinois at 7-1 for the best available price. You got them at 850 a couple weeks ago. What about Northern Illinois puts them in the mix here for you?
Well, I like their quarterback, Rocky Lombardi. He's one of the best returners in the conference. They had a bunch of one-score wins last year, which you could pass off as, regress to the mean. I don't really know if I buy that too much because they're really well coached. Thomas Haddock is the MAC Coach of the Year. They bring back some of the most production in the entire country, not just in the MAC. They're the defending champions. I do have to make a note here, and this was after I placed a bet. They did lose their top wide receiver and explosive kick returner. He's the same player. He's out for the season. That hurts them a little bit, but they won, by spreading the ball around, having a good quarterback, being able to run a high-tempo offense, their defense was pretty bad. Hopefully a better defense this year because they're returning a lot of guys. But, again, with that price, $850, it's almost playing with house money at that point. You could put down a little and win a pretty good amount back on a team that is the defending champions, that returns some of the most production in the entire country and the most in the second most in the MAC behind Bowling Green. But it's hard to find something not to like about Northern Illinois this year.
Not often you get a price like this to win the conference on a team that was voted by their media and had the most votes to win the conference. Like that does not happen very often. And last but not least, the second choice here is one that you haven't been able to quite eliminate from consideration is Miami, Ohio. Why?
college is a quarterback game, quarterback and coaching. If you have a great defensive line, that's awesome too. But Brett Gabbert is probably the best quarterback in the MAC. He brings back his top receiver from last year, and they play in the MAC East, which is a whole lot easier this season than the MAC West. They're 9th nationally in expected points added on passing plays. That's pretty good. That's pretty a good measure for how good Gabbert can be. And they're 8th nationally in early down success rate. Warren Sharp loves throwing that around for the NFL. It can be and should be applied to college football as well. So just an all-around good offense. I think people are really kind of growing on Miami. If their price hasn't dropped too much already, I would probably expect it to drop a little bit more, but you're just betting on the best quarterback in the conference, which we've seen in college football makes the difference.
All right, let's move on now to the odds to make the college football playoff. For this, we'll go over to DraftKings Sportsbook and take a look at some of the teams here that you have pinpointed as potentially having a path to reach the top 4 by the end of the season. And we are going to begin with Texas A&M, which is at 7-1 to make the college football playoff. We know it's not an easy schedule in the SEC, but what is it about the Aggies that you think they might be able to thread the needle here and get into the top 4 by the end of the season?
Yeah, I hate buying into the teams that just every year are like, yep, they're going to be good, and they don't. That's Texas A&M, that's Texas, that's Miami. Unfortunately, I'm taking the bait on all 3 this year. Texas A&M has the roster talent, has the power to be a top 5 team. In 2020, they went 9-1. I think they finished 5th in the final college football playoff poll. But they're at plus 700, which is a 12.5% implied probability to make the playoff. FanDuel has props up for 10 to win 10 or more games. And their price on that is plus 155, which is just shy of 40%, meaning that they'd have to beat multiple of Miami, Alabama, Arkansas, Ole Miss, and LSU later in the season when they got time to figure their stuff out. So their resume would be there. If they can win 10 games and have that resume, Texas A&M could be the first 2-loss team, again, with who they play, to make the playoffs. Now, they have the 5th best title odds nationally, 5th, and yet we're looking at this plus 700 to just make the playoffs. So I understand the mechanics behind that. That's if you can win in the SEC West, you are probably going to go to college football playoff. I firmly believe in that. And their price reflects that it's an uphill battle. I think they're plus 1,800 to win the SEC West this season. The biggest hurdle for them is going to be their quarterback. Is it Haynes King? Don't know. Is it Max Johnson, who transferred in from LSU? I'm not a huge believer in him. Again, I don't know. But if you look at their 10-plus win prop, if you look at their win total, if you look at their odds to win the national championship, it kind of doesn't mesh into having such a long price to just make the playoffs. So this is a ceiling play. I understand at the end of the year, if Texas A&M goes 8-4, I'm going to be looking back at it and being like, well, duh, could have seen that one coming. But there's not a lot of numbers in this prop that I like.
Yeah, I mean, mathematically, it makes a ton of sense. You make a great point that on the plus 155 for 10-plus wins, there's a very good chance that 10 wins is still good enough to get into the playoff, and you're getting plus 700 in this market instead. If they get to 11 wins, there's an amazing chance that they're make the playoffs.
Yeah,
they're probably in at 11 wins.
Win, yeah.
So that'd be 7-1 again. So on the opposite end of the spectrum here, you are not a fan of Clemson's odds to make the playoffs. Let me see if DraftKings has them listed here. Yeah, only plus 145 for Clemson to make the playoffs, which a little too rich for your blood.
Yeah, that's a 40.8% implied probability to make the playoffs. That's pretty high. Now, historically, they make the playoff. Historically, they're great. They have one of the best defensive lines, if not the best defensive line in the entire country. I mean, this thing is loaded with first-round NFL talent. That can get you a pretty long way. But you have no idea if, I'm not even going to try to botch his name, DJU, their quarterback. I don't even know if he's the guy. Opposing coaches in some preview magazines seem to think not. But then you go back and ask Cade Klubnik, who's a freshman incoming, who I'm really high on. I think he's really good. But then you're asking him to lead this team to the playoff. Trevor Lawrence did it, but are we saying that Cade Klubnik is now Trevor Lawrence? I wouldn't go that far. They have 2 brand new coordinators. They lost both their guys to head coaching jobs. I don't think that this warrants a 40.8% implied win rate. And interestingly, I responded to one of Bill Connolly's tweets about Clemson. I asked him, do you think this is foundational or is this just kind of a one-off? And he told me outright, he's like, no, I think this is a foundational problem. That scares me.
Yeah, great insight there for sure. The other team that I'm curious about, Texas at 8-1. I know you said you like Oklahoma better than Texas, but if the ceiling does actually get there for once for the Longhorns and they win the Big 12, I mean, there's the gap between them winning the Big 12 and being like the 4 seed in the playoff, I imagine can't be that wide.
No, and I'd be foolish to not take into effect that Texas is such a huge, historic national brand with an enormous athletic budget, an enormous fan base, and a fan base that has a lot of buying power.
Yeah.
I know it's supposed to be about merit on the field, but if we're looking down a Big 12 champion, Texas, with 1 loss or 0 loss, well, if they 0 losses, they're definitely in, but if they have 1 loss, maybe even 2, depending on how they play, the playoff committee probably wants them in just for the fact that this is a revenue driving team. My background is in sport management, so I think this way. Maybe it's a flawed way of thinking, but I think it's flawed to think that has no effect whatsoever on their playoff chances. If you're bringing it down to, let's say, an 11-2 ACC champion NC State and an 11-2 Big 12 champion Texas, the nod's going to go to Texas.
Yeah, that's fair. That's kind of how I feel. I feel like if they have the same record as the ACC champion, then they would get in with likely Ohio State and 2 SEC teams. So, yes, there's always a chance USC just goes scorched earth because we've never seen it before and they have a ton of talent. But, I mean, we've seen like one Pac-12 team make the college football playoff. So,
and they got absolutely embarrassed.
They got crushed. They got it's like the worst. Washington was like the worst team to ever make the college football playoff. So,
but their score wasn't any worse than Cincinnati this year. It was 24-7 against the same team, Alabama. So,
yeah, that's fair. Fair point. All right, let's move on now to overall futures to win the national championship. Again, if you are not familiar, you can find us under the odds tab under NCAA football and click on national title odds. And to nobody's surprise, the top team in the odds is the Alabama Crimson Tide. Plus 190 is the best available price right now at BetMGM. Ohio State has made the move from earlier this offseason and leapfrog Georgia. Now plus 320, Georgia at plus 425. Your thoughts on this market and if you think anybody else has a reasonable chance of actually cashing this ticket?
Yeah, well, I'm going to block out the Ohio State stuff behind me. Ignore that. If you would have gotten Ohio State back where they opened at plus 800, yeah, bet that. They're probably the most all-around talented team in the country. And
too late now, Brett.
Right. It's way too late. Train's left the station. So I'm not betting anybody. I don't think there's long shots that warrant, that jump off the page. I'm like, yes, they have a clear path to the playoff. USC, if they hit on their ceiling, sure. They're now plus 2,500. I think they opened at plus maybe 5,000. They're plus 2,500 at DraftKings. Texas is plus 8,000 at FanDuel. If you buy into those ceiling plays, great. I'm not going complete. Yeah, no, they're going to win the title. I don't even think it's worth a flyer. Tennessee's interesting. 100-1 if you're really looking for someone to throw a dart at. But if I was in the picks business, I would be picking Alabama to win the title. I'm not in the picks business. We're in the betting business. I'm not going to tell you to buy them at their price. I just don't see any value there.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about this conceptually, right? If you're thinking about taking an underdog and you think that they can squeak into the playoffs, we just talked about Texas. FPI has Texas 13 points worse, 12 points worse than Alabama. So if they get into the playoff and have to play Alabama or Ohio State, they're going to be more than a touchdown underdog in that game. Like you can't even hedge that ticket at that point. You're paying such a premium on the money line of the favorite in that game. That it makes it really difficult to take a long shot in this market and come out with any exciting profit if they don't actually win the title. So, I mean, we've seen it with Joe Burrow in the past. The team can come on and just have an amazing season, but let's be honest here. This is a 3-team system in terms of when it comes to winning the national championship after Clemson has dropped off in recent years with Deshaun Watson no longer there. So I'm with you. I don't see any value in this market. I don't think it's worth it. I think I'd just try and find whoever I think is going to be the 4 seed and bet them to make the playoff and see what happens on that front. All right, go ahead, Brett.
Really quick. Texas right now is a 16.5-point home underdog to Alabama in week 2. Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Amazing. Even Michigan, right? Like, look at Michigan last year. You probably got an amazing number on them to win the national championship. They get to the playoff, they get spanked. Like, what's the point? There's really no point. Right. All right. Finally, Heisman odds. And this is what I think your research has been the most interesting so far this offseason. And you have been looking at past preseason Heisman odds. Again, you can find the Heisman odds under the odds tab under NCAA football. No big surprises here. C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young at the top of the board, plus 275, plus 400. Everybody else 8-1 or longer. In fact, Caleb Williams 8-1, and everybody else is 30-1 or longer. So I think just if you haven't done your research, you're looking at the board, you're like, of course it's going to be one of these top 3 guys that wins the Heisman. But in the words of the great Lee Corso, not so fast, my friends. You have done some research here and found that very rarely do the top 2 favorites in the preseason Heisman odds actually go on to win the award.
Yeah, 2 of them have that were the top 2 preseason favorites in the past 13 years. 3 of the top 3. No preseason favorites. You know, it's hard.
Zero
Stroud.
preseason Heisman favorites have won the trophy in the last 13 years.
None. So It's hard to look at C.J. Stroud. It's hard to look at Bryce Young and be like, nah, neither of you guys. How not? C.J. Stroud this season is probably going to be pushing up on 5,000 passing yards and 50 passing touchdowns. And Bryce Young, we just saw what happened is, he won the Heisman. How are you going to look at these guys and be like, no? Usually history says not to. So there's a few statistical benchmarks that I found that, take these as you may. Every single Heisman Trophy winner, the past 10 quarterbacks have hit at least 44 total touchdowns. 7 of the last 10 have hit 47, and 5 of the last 10 have hit 50. So you got to start thinking about guys that can reach that benchmark. There's really not that many, right? And then they also have to win at least 9 games. Each of the last 10 quarterback Heisman winners has won at least 10 games. 9 of those 11 have won 11 games, and 7 of those went to the national championship. Well, now it's really hard to look at C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young and be like, no, thanks, because those are the 2 guys that I'm like, yeah, no, they can do that. They probably will do that in terms of winning 11 games, going to the national championship, etc. And the last thing, sorry, Group 5 fans, I'm a fan of all college football, but you have to be in the Power 5. The last non-Power 5 player to win it was in 1990. That was Ty Detmer at BYU, and they're moving into, they were kind of always the ambiguous in-between. If you want to go back before then, you're looking at Roger Staubach when he played at Navy. And they were a power back then. So you have to be part of a power program. Generally, your completion has to be over 70% and your quarterback rating around 200. We've seen guys like Lamar Jackson and Johnny Manziel and these kind of dual threat, explosive runners. That time is kind of, I don't want to say expired, but they're not getting the same kind of Heisman attention as they were in 2012 and 2016. We're now looking at, just like in the NFL, hyper efficient passers. 200 quarterback rating, over 70% completion. Guys like Joe Burrow, who just set new NCAA records. So that's kind of who we're looking at in if you're trying to look for a long shot, that is.
And I have scrolled to the bottom of the board here with that in mind, that no Heisman preseason favorite has won the award in the past 13 years. We are looking at a group here on the screen between 60 and 80-1, and you have pinpointed 2 that you think actually do have a chance to win this award.
Yeah, there's 3 that fit the mold and 2 that I really like. And those 2 that I really like are Hendon Hooker of Tennessee and Devin Leary of NC State. Hendon Hooker went bananas last year. He had 31 passing touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. He did post over 180 quarterback rating. He didn't even start the year at quarterback, actually. That was Joe Milton, the Michigan transfer, who I saw struggle against my Bowling Green Falcons defense. Not on the scoreboard, but overall, he was bad. So Hendon Hooker comes in, lights it up. Tennessee does have the fifth hardest schedule in terms of FPI. They play Alabama. They play Georgia. They have an out-of-conference game against Pitt. That's tough. But if Hendon Hooker can get it done against those guys, that's going to be something that we're going to be talking about. If he gets it done against two of those teams, if he gets it done against Georgia, people are going to be like, yeah, he's really good. If he can touch anywhere near that 31-3 touchdown interception ratio, I like him a lot. And you can get him at 60-1. That's a pretty good price, I think.
For sure.
And then Devin Leary.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
60-1 on Hooker is at FanDuel right now. And Devin Leary, 80-1, also best available price at FanDuel. What do you like about Devin Leary?
Everything. I actually have. I do have a long shot bet on Devin Leary. I was able to get him at 150-1 earlier in the season, which is great. He has the highest touchdown rate and yards per attempt of returning ACC quarterbacks. You know, the only one that was ahead of him last year was Kenny Pickett, and we were talking so much about Kenny Pickett that we didn't really talk about Devin Leary all that much. The last quarterback to do that was Sam Howell. He was the Heisman frontrunner of last year. Didn't go so well because that defense was 106th in points per drive. Just awful, awful stuff. Devin Leary has a top 15 defense and almost his entire offensive line returning to him. All of his weapons are back. I think they're somewhere around 82% returning production on this season. They're a very good football team. There's a reason that they're 13th in the preseason AP poll. I mean, people are starting to notice NC State is like, oh no, they're going to be really good. You know, they have to get over that hurdle of Clemson. They did last year. Can they do it again on the road? We'll see. Just these, you know, Leary has the statistical indicators that he's going to do at least as well as he did last year, which I think warrants an 80-1 long shot.
Yeah, fair. The last name that you mentioned here is Cameron Ward from Washington State. Obviously, an offense that can produce a lot of statistics, but I'm assuming that you just don't think the wins are going to be there.
Yeah, I did want to mention before Georgia fans yell at me, Stetson Bennett does actually fit this mold.
Okay.
I just don't think Georgia has the pace of play, the passing volume, the high tempo offense that you'd like to see from someone who's really going to take the top off. He was up there in quarterback rating, expected points added, all that kind of stuff. I just think that there's too many factors in Georgia for Stetson Bennett to really be in the running. But yeah, Cameron Ward, love this guy. He's coming out of Incarnate Word, which is FCS down in San Antonio or Houston. I'm sorry for mixing that up. But he comes in Washington State. Now the question is, can a guy who played in the FCS jump all the way up to Power 5 football and excel? Don't know. But he's going to be in a system that's going to make it really easy for him. I expect him to be high volume, high completion percentage, low yards per attempt because they have these like short, little shifty receivers. They don't have a lot of big, tall guys. They're not going to be doing a lot downfield. But they're going to kind of a run and shoot / air raid hybrid offense, which has built guys in Washington State's past like Anthony Gordon, Gardner Minshew. These guys were throwing for 4,500, 5,000 yards or more. I think if he does that, he's going to be at least in the conversation. I don't know if he necessarily has, the ability to be a top 3 guy. I don't know if we'll see him in New York, but he has the ability to be in the conversation. And Washington State has the ability to exceed their win total. I think it's only a 5.5. I would take over on that, but that's a show for another day. I don't know if he can get to 9 wins. I don't think they can get to 11, and they're not going to be in the playoff conversation for sure, but he's an interesting player to watch who, at the end of the year, you might look at the total gross yards passing and be like, oh, I didn't know Cameron Ward was at the top.
Absolutely love it. Fantastic insight going into the college football season from our college football writer, Brett Gibbons. Again, you can find him on Twitter at Road to CFB. Guy's been to over 100 college football stadiums in person. He is a diehard. He has been researching nonstop over the past few months as his editor. It's been really fun to look at his work and get it ready for publication. And the research has been fantastic. So thank you, Brett, for joining us. On our next show, the week of August the 29th, Brett is going to break down the college football win totals that he has bet going into the season. We hope you will join us. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think, which of these bets you agree with heading into the season. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so you know next time when another college football video is up and ready to go here on the Lions YouTube channel. For Brett Gibbons, I'm Steven Andress. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.